Have you ever looked at your screen completely baffled by a cryptic error message that really seems to be written in Klingon? Yeah, we have all been there. Today, I'm going to share my go-to strategies for decoding and fixing those bizarre cryptic errors, because life's too short to lose your sanity over error messages. Let's start with the reality. You're running an ETL pipeline, a SQL query, or a Python script, and suddenly it fails with some weird error message. And something like maybe unknown error occurred, code XYZ123. You're left wondering, is this even English? Cryptic errors don't just slow you down. They throw your entire day off. They start to trigger those feelings of imposter syndrome. Then they really feel like a frustrating puzzle without a solution. So the clock is ticking. Deadlines are looming. You're stuck Googling some obscure error codes, reading through forums from 10 years ago, and spending hours chasing ghosts. It doesn't just impact your productivity, it increases your stress levels, risks project timelines, and really starts to hurt team morale. We've all been there, losing hours and maybe some hair over really some unclear error messages. So what do you do? Why do these errors occur? Cryptic errors really happen because our systems are complex. Layers of abstraction, cloud tools, legacy code bases, APIs, and integrations can really start to obscure what really went wrong. Error messages often assume that you understand the internal workings of the tool or the framework that you're working with, leaving you really without any actionable insights. So the cure? Here's my approach. Divide and conquer. So I don't mean to split it up amongst your team, right? I mean break down the process. Start to break it into chunks, see what succeeds, see what fails, and then narrow down your focus, right? So isolate exactly where the error is occurring. Logging and auditing. Add detailed logging to key stages in your pipeline to really pinpoint what's causing the issue. When you're using Python, I like to use print statements with different numbers so I could refer back to that exact point and see exactly what succeeded and what failed so I could start to eliminate what's going on. Environment checks. Verify your variables, verify the packages that you're importing, make sure that you have the right permissions and the user that you're using to access those systems via maybe your ETL tool has the correct permissions as well, not just you. Make sure your credentials are up to date, or you're accessing the right version in a key vault of a password or a secret. Often the root cause is much clearer as you start to move through things. Many cryptic errors really boil down to some of these basics. Start to read it backwards, right? I don't mean, running a record backwards on your turntable. You are going to start at the end of the error message and the error log and start to work your way backwards. Often the root cause is so much clearer at the end of that message than it is at the beginning. Oftentimes the beginning of the stack trace or the error message will just say something really vague, but the further you get into it, the easier it is to identify. Use your community. Forums like Stack Overflow, vendor support documents, GitHub, even, Reddit can really start to help you. Don't forget your AI tools. Check out, Copilot, check out ChatGPT, Perplexity, whatever the case may be, to help you try to resolve the issue. All right, so here's a quick story. I recently was importing historical records into Snowflake via Informatica. I wasn't getting any error messages, honestly. So talk about Cryptic. Everything looked like it succeeded. This happens a lot in Informatica. Things show that they succeeded, but not all the records were showing up in the table. So I had to go through and start to identify what exactly went wrong. So often things may go wrong and you don't realize that they went wrong until you do some of your validation. So it's so important to do your validation as you go through, especially when you're creating a new pipeline, making adjustments to an existing pipeline or an ETL process. So often things just go awry. So in this specific case, there was one record from each of the historical files that was missing. And I was like, what in the heck? And each file had thousands of records and thousands of records. So I had to go through each of the files. There were about 15 different files that I had to go through and identify, okay, which of these records showed up in Snowflake and which of them didn't. And again, one record for each of those 15 files. And so again, I honestly exported a CSV from Snowflake, did a VLOOKUP, and compared to the files that the historical files that I had, and identified which of the records from each file that was missing. In this specific case, while there was a different record, it ended up being the same customer on each of the files that caused the error. And what ended up causing the issue was that this specific customer was entered with a comma at the end of their name. And so when it was importing, for whatever reason, Informatica just didn't see the record. And so Informatica skipped that record altogether. And so ended up, just doing a little bit of conversion and regex type replacement, and was able to get those records into Snowflake, but not without some trial and tribulation, right? Not without some troubleshooting, some EDA, and really examining the files and comparing the data to what ended up in Snowflake. And again, there were no errors in this case. So I want to go over one other example where I did get an error. All right, you're going to like this one. So this one is an example where I was working in Databricks. So I was working with PySpark, with Python and the Spark library. And so this particular notebook ran, and the error code was an error occurred while calling and the name of a process. And so it just said error occurred while calling 054 run. And so it doesn't tell you a lot, right? That message really is pretty cryptic. An error occurred. Okay, cool. So what do you do? So you start to investigate. You start to look at that stack trace. And again, you go down, look at the end, and you see me glancing at the screen. It's not something I could share, but it's something I could talk about. And you go down to the end. And at the end, it helps you to identify. You could work your way backwards and figure out where, with Databricks that has some really great logging anyways, you'll be able to see exactly what line caused it to fail. And then you could go to that line and try to troubleshoot from there. Now the issue comes in is if that line is calling a method or a function from another notebook, and you don't really have anywhere to go from there. And that was the case here. This notebook is calling another notebook, and the error actually was nested in that notebook, in that process. And so again, working our way backwards, very much working our way backwards, having to open up that notebook and manually going through and running it and giving it those parameters that it was being fed from the other notebook, from the parent notebook. And so running that notebook with those parameters that it would have been given at the time, I was able to identify exactly which record, which row in the Python script was causing the issue. In this particular case, it was a date time conversion, right? And so it was causing an issue because new files that were coming in had a different date time precision than the previous files that were coming in, and it caused some issues. And so in this case, it just added some parsing and some conversion into the Python script, created a new function, and I was able to resolve the issue. But again, very cryptic message to begin with. Very, something that didn't tell me a whole lot of anything. Never pointed to a conversion issue or any type of error like that. And so you run into things, and sometimes you are Googling, sometimes you are asking ChatGPT what the heck's going on, sometimes you are relying on, with Databricks, you have Genie in Databricks that sometimes can help you to troubleshoot. Use your tools, use your resources, use the people around you that may know more about, especially if other people around you have been at the company longer, they may have come across that specific error message, especially if it's data that's been being used for a long time. So again, a couple of great examples I wanted to give you, and here we are going to talk about some key takeaways here and just do some recap. Key takeaways for effective troubleshooting. Start small. Isolate the exact